He had everything: private jets, mansions, his name on buildings. But the moment he made me choose between being silent or being his, I knew I had to walk away. This isn't a story about heartbreak, it's about power, my power, and how walking away became my richest move yet. If you've ever been told to dim your light for someone else's comfort, this story is for you. Subscribe, like, and stay with me till the end, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away, even from the person everyone thinks is your dream come true. I remember that night like it was painted in gold, soft lights bouncing off crystal chandeliers, the hum of laughter masked behind champagne flutes, the air thick with money and ambition. I wore a black silk gown, one of those dresses that doesn't just fit, it claims you. Not the most expensive in the room, but when I walked in, people turned. Not because of the dress, but because I carried myself like I knew I belonged, even if part of me still questioned it. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there on a last-minute invite, half curious, half bored, trying not to roll my eyes at yet another circle of power-playing suits. Then he walked in. Not with noise, but with presence. Everyone seemed to lean in without even knowing it. He had that kind of energy, the kind that didn't ask for attention but stole it anyway. I noticed him before he noticed me. He moved through the crowd like he owned the room, probably because he did. You could smell the wealth on him, but it wasn't loud. It was polished, subtle, like he didn't have to try anymore. Our eyes met somewhere between hors d'oeuvres, and yet another dull conversation I was pretending to enjoy. I didn't even know who he was at first, just that he looked at me like he wasn't impressed by the room either, like we were both watching a show neither of us bought tickets for. He walked over and introduced himself, and I remember thinking, finally, someone who talks like they mean it. No empty charm, no weird power games. We talked for an hour, about books, music, where we grew up, the little things. It wasn't a pitch, it wasn't a flex, it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I let my guard down. Our first few dates felt like something out of a dream, but not the kind that makes you feel small. No, this dream felt grounded, like I could breathe in it. The kind where you're still yourself, just held in a softer light. He whisked me away to a private art exhibit one evening, just the two of us and the curator. Another night, we sat front row at a jazz lounge that didn't even open to the public until midnight. But what struck me most wasn't the extravagance. It was how quietly he moved within it. The way he reached for my hand like he wasn't showing off. The way he listened. Still, I kept my own rhythm. I went to work every morning. Took the subway like I always had. I kept brunch with my girls and Sunday calls with my mama. I didn't rush to fit into his world. I let him step into mine. And to his credit, at first, he did. He asked questions, laughed at the stories of my neighborhood aunties, even tried my favorite carry-out spot. It felt balanced, like we were building something between two worlds, not just living in his. But even then, little things caught my attention. The way he'd pause before tipping the delivery guy, like he'd never done it himself. How he'd never ask how my day went, but always had a story about a big win. I told myself it was just adjustment, that it took time to blend lives so different. And maybe it did. But somewhere in me, a quiet part, was already watching closely. Not judging, just collecting. Because when someone shows you their life, they're also showing you what they value. And I was still figuring out whether I was in it, or just passing through it. The deeper we got, the more I started to wonder what exactly I was falling for. Was it him, or was it the illusion of him? The curated life, the polished charm, the ease with which doors opened wherever he stepped. He had this way of making you feel chosen, like you were lucky just to be beside him. But sometimes I'd catch myself adjusting. My tone, my laugh, even the stories I told, just to keep up with the version of me I thought he wanted. That's when the questions started creeping in. He never said it outright, but I could feel it. The unspoken rules. The way he'd change the subject when I talked about my community work, or tense up when I corrected someone mispronouncing my name. Once, I told him about a panel I was invited to speak on, Black Women in Leadership, and he nodded, distracted, scrolling through his phone. "Sounds cool," he said. That was it. Just cool, like it wasn't a big deal. Still, there were moments when I'd catch glimpses of something real, when he'd open up about his childhood, his fears, the loneliness behind the wealth, and I'd think, this is him. This is the man I'm choosing. But then he'd retreat again, into board meetings and brand deals, and a version of life that felt too smooth, too manicured. I started asking myself, was I truly being seen or just being showcased? Did he love me, or did he love what I represented? A smart, beautiful Black woman who made him look progressive, grounded, desirable. The more I tried to hold on to who I was, the more I realized I was slowly being edited, trimmed down, polished up, and no matter how gentle it looked, it still felt like erasure. At first, the pressure was so subtle I almost missed it. It came dressed in compliments. "You're so elegant when you stay quiet in those meetings. You have such a calming energy. I love how you don't always have to speak." I'd smile, but something inside me would pull back, like a string being tugged tight. Because I knew what he meant. He didn't mean grace. He meant silence. The more I stepped into his world, the dinners with CEOs, the charity galas, the networking trips to European villas, the more I felt like I had to leave pieces of myself at the door. I was too bold when I spoke up, too opinionated when I challenged a comment, too aware when I brought race into the conversation. There was this unspoken expectation that I'd nod, smile, and make everyone feel comfortable. But I wasn't raised to make myself small. I was raised to tell the truth, especially when it was uncomfortable. There was one event, I'll never forget it. A woman asked me where I was really from, then followed it with, "You're so articulate, it's surprising." I laughed, tight-lipped. I looked at him. He just smiled and changed the subject. Later, in the car, I brought it up. He said, "You can't take everything so personally. She didn't mean anything by it." That stung more than the comment. I started realizing I wasn't just being asked to blend in. I was being asked to disappear, piece by piece, my voice, my fire, myself. He wanted the version of me that fit his brand, the one who looked good in photos, nodded at the right moments, and never made too much noise. But I knew then, love that demands silence isn't love. It's control dressed up in gold. That night was supposed to be simple. Just a dinner. 10 people around a long marble table at one of those restaurants where the portions are small, but the egos are huge. I wore a cream suit, powerful, clean, unmistakably me. He held my hand under the table when we sat down, a quiet gesture, like reassurance. But it didn't last. Halfway through the evening, one of the investors, older, white, drunk on both wine and his own importance, made a joke that landed like glass shattering. Something about inner cities and girls like you making it out. Everyone laughed, not full laughter, but that weird, stiff chuckle people use when they want to seem okay with something that isn't. I didn't laugh. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "That's not funny." Calm, clear, no heat, just truth. The table went silent. He shifted uncomfortably beside me, like I'd broken a rule we never agreed on. Later, in the car, he turned to me and said, "You didn't have to make it awkward. These people don't mean harm." I remember staring at him, stunned. These people. That was the line. The moment the curtain dropped. Because it wasn't just about the joke, it was about his choice to stand beside them instead of beside me. He called it business. I called it betrayal. That was the night I realized love doesn't live in grand gestures and Instagram captions. It lives in the quiet moments when someone chooses you, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's costly. And he didn't choose me. Not really. He chose comfort. He chose image. He chose the room. And I decided then and there, I would never shrink myself for someone else's empire. If it came down to them or me, I would choose me, every time. We didn't talk for 2 days after that dinner. Not a word. He sent flowers, texts, a vague, "Let's talk soon," but I wasn't interested in pretty things with no weight behind them. When we finally sat down, his penthouse, skyline behind us like a movie set, I knew this conversation wasn't going to be soft, and I didn't want it to be. I told him, plainly, I wasn't angry about the joke. I was angry that he let it slide. Angry that I had to sit at a table and defend my right to be respected, while he stayed silent to protect his image. He looked at me like I was overreacting, like I was being difficult. He tried to reason it away, said things like, "You don't know what's at stake," and "This is how the game is played." That's when I really understood. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a prop. I asked him, "Do you love me for who I am, or for how I make you look?" He didn't answer right away. Just stared at me, jaw tense, like I'd asked something he wasn't ready to admit, not even to himself. Then he said it. "I need someone who won't make things harder for me." My chest tightened. There it was, the truth, raw and simple. He wanted easy, silent, compliant. So I stood up, smoothed my dress, and told him I wouldn't be the woman he could keep in his life only if I kept shrinking. I told him I wouldn't fight to stay in a space that required me to disappear. And as I walked away, I wasn't just leaving him, I was reclaiming myself. Because if loving me fully was a threat to his empire, then he was never building a life that could hold me to begin with. The silence after I left was loud. Not just the absence of his voice, but the absence of noise, the dinners, the jet setting, the constant orbit of people who only knew how to talk business and never asked how I was really doing. I thought I'd feel free, but at first, I just felt empty. Like I'd walked out of a world that didn't fit, but still hadn't found where I belonged. There were nights I questioned myself, wondered if I'd made it too personal, if I could have handled it better, if walking away had been too much. But that voice inside, the one I had tried to quiet for so long, kept reminding me, you didn't lose anything that truly valued you. I started returning to myself, slow, steady. I filled my space with the things I had been too distracted to enjoy. Books, long walks, homemade meals that didn't come with a price tag or a dress code. I called friends I hadn't seen in weeks. I laughed more. I slept better. I remembered what it felt like to be held by my own peace, not someone else's version of success. And yes, it hurt. Leaving always does, even when it's right. But every time I thought about going back, I asked myself, would you rather be loved for half of who you are, or stand fully in your truth, even if it means standing alone? Alone didn't mean broken. It meant whole. It meant choosing myself, even when the world told me I was walking away from a dream. But that wasn't my dream. I was never meant to be a silent shadow next to someone else's spotlight. I was born to shine, on my own terms, in my own light. And finally, I was starting to remember that. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. You'd think when a woman walks away from a billionaire, the world might pause and ask why. But instead, it became a spectacle. Blogs speculated. Headlines twisted the story into something unrecognizable. Beauty walks out on Billionaire. Was she too demanding? The one who couldn't keep him. Not once did they ask what it cost me to stay. People I didn't know had opinions. Some said I was brave, others said I was foolish. A few pitied me, as if I'd made some tragic mistake I'd regret once the glamour faded. But what none of them saw were the nights I stared in the mirror, slowly recognizing the woman looking back. The peace in her eyes, the quiet in her spirit. That was the real story, one no headline would print. What surprised me most were the messages that came in silence. DMS from women I'd never met. Notes slipped under the radar. Thank you for leaving. I didn't have the words until I heard yours. You helped me walk away too. Those quiet nods meant everything, because when you're a black woman standing in your truth, the world tries to convince you you're being difficult, ungrateful, too loud, too much. But those women reminded me, I wasn't alone. I wasn't wrong. He never publicly spoke about it, just moved on with someone new, someone softer, more agreeable, the kind of woman who knew how to blend in. And that was fine. That was his choice. But I knew then that I hadn't been a phase. I'd been a mirror, and he didn't like what he saw. Let them talk. Let them wonder. I didn't need the world to understand my decision. I just needed to keep walking in it, with my head high and my soul intact. I didn't plan to build something from the ashes. I just needed to breathe again. But once I started standing in my truth, the path almost carved itself. I began speaking more openly, online, at panels, on podcasts, sharing the parts of my story that so many women quietly carry. Not the glamorous parts, but the gritty, unfiltered truth about what it means to choose yourself in a world that begs you to settle. What started as journaling became essays. Essays became a blog. That blog caught fire. A few months later, I launched a platform, a space for black women to share, heal, and lead without code switching, without shrinking. We built a community rooted in honesty and joy, not perfection. No one had to perform. We could just be. And that, to me, felt like wealth. People asked if I missed the lifestyle, the jets, the dinners, the diamonds. And sure, those things sparkle. But nothing shines like the peace of knowing you are no longer pretending. Nothing feels richer than waking up every day, knowing you didn't trade your soul for status. I wasn't trying to prove anything to him, or to the world. I was proving something to me, that I could build something real, that I could use my voice and be heard, loudly, clearly, unapologetically. That love, when it does come again, won't ask me to shrink. It'll make room. This wasn't a comeback. It was a rebirth. Because while he was out there preserving an empire built on image, I was building one built on truth. Mine may not have gold-plated gates, but it has something far more rare, freedom. And I'll take that over a castle any day. I'm not waiting to be chosen. I've already chosen myself. Looking back now, it's not anger I feel. It's clarity. I don't hate him. I don't wish him harm. If anything, I hope he finds what he's really looking for, not just in boardrooms and bank accounts, but in quiet spaces where truth lives. But I also know this. He made a choice. And so did I. He picked comfort over courage, optics over honesty. He chose the kind of love that doesn't shake the room, doesn't challenge the system, doesn't make anyone uncomfortable. And maybe that's what he needed. But me, I was never made to be a trophy or a secret or a footnote in someone else's empire. I was made to build, to speak, to take up space, not in spite of who I am, but because of who I am. Black, brilliant, bold, and deeply rooted in a love that starts within. I didn't need his world to validate my worth. I never did. What I needed was to remember that I was never asking for too much. I was just asking the wrong person. He picked wrong, yes, but I picked right. I picked the path that let me keep my voice, my fire, my full self. I walked away from the idea that love has to come with silence, that success means being tolerated instead of celebrated. And I've never looked back. So to anyone listening, if you've ever been asked to dim your light just to fit into someone else's story, let this be your reminder. You have the power to write your own. Don't wait for someone to choose you. Choose yourself first. Because sometimes the most powerful love story isn't the one where you end up with him. It's the one where you finally come home to you. To every woman who's ever been asked to shrink for someone else, know this: you are never too much. You are exactly enough. And the right people won't need you to choose between love and power. Don't forget to share this with someone who needs that reminder. You are the empire.